Close your eyes and let the noise of the present world slip quietly into silence. Tonight, we journey not into distant ruins or forgotten forests, but into the halls of one of history's most mysterious brotherhoods, the Knights Templar. They were warriors and monks, bound by oaths as strict as any monastic order. Yet they carried swords into battle with a fury that struck fear across continents. They wore white mantles adorned with the red cross, a symbol of purity and sacrifice. Yet behind that cross lingered whispers of hidden rituals, buried treasures, and forbidden knowledge. Were they saints of Christendom, or keepers of secrets the church could not speak aloud? Their story begins in devotion, with a handful of knights swearing to protect pilgrims on the perilous road to Jerusalem. From those humble origins, they rose to command castles, armies, and wealth across Europe and the Holy Land. Kings knelt before them, popes blessed them, and enemies feared them. And yet, as swiftly as they rose, they fell betrayed, accused of heresy, consumed in fire, their ashes scattered in the wind. But the Templars never truly vanished. Their memory endures not only in history, but in legend. Some say they guarded the Ark of the Covenant, others the Holy Grail. Some whisper that their secrets survived in hidden brotherhoods, carrying knowledge passed down in shadow. History ends their tale in flames, but myth ensures they ride forever through the corridors of imagination. As you drift deeper into this story, feel the contrast. Light and devotion on one side, darkness and suspicion on the other. The Knights Templar are not only men of the past, they are echoes that still linger, whispering beneath the cross. The year was 1119. The first crusade had already torn through the Holy Land, leaving behind both triumph and ruin. Jerusalem had fallen into Christian hands, but the roads that led there were still haunted by danger. Pilgrims who had crossed seas and deserts to reach the holy city often found themselves prey to bandits, ambushes, and sudden death. It was in this perilous landscape that 9 knights gathered, led by a man named Hugues de Payens. They were not princes, not emperors, but warriors who bound themselves to a vow to protect pilgrims, to defend the paths to Jerusalem, and to serve Christ with both prayer and steel. They had no riches, no lands, only conviction. Their base was humble, yet steeped in mystery. King Baldwin II granted them quarters on the Temple Mount itself, the sacred plateau where Solomon's temple was once said to have stood. From this dwelling came their name, Pauperes Commilitones, Christi Templice Salomonici, the poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon. To the world, they became the Knights Templar. Imagine the scene. A handful of men, their cloaks plain, their swords worn, standing in the shadow of ruins older than memory. Their poverty was real. For years they relied on alms, living on donations from pilgrims and nobles who admired their cause. They called themselves poor, and yet their station upon the Temple Mount whispered of destiny. The contrast was stark. In their vows, they embraced humility, poverty, chastity, obedience. But their mission placed them in the heart of holy war. They prayed in silence, and then rode into battle with cries that echoed like thunder. They were both monks and warriors, shadows of devotion wrapped in steel. This strange blend, sacred vows and martial power, set them apart. And soon, their story would spread across Christendom, drawing the gaze of kings and popes alike. What began as 9 humble knights on a dangerous road would grow into one of the most powerful orders the medieval world had ever seen. As you drift deeper into this story, imagine the silence of the Temple Mount at night. Stars glitter above, torches flicker along the walls, and within the dark chambers of stone, Their armor rests beside them, their swords glint faintly, and their oath binds them together to serve, to protect, and to die if needed. The Templars had been born. As the Templars grew in reputation, they sought more than swords and vows. They sought structure, an order that would bind them as tightly in discipline as in faith. In 1129, at the Council of Troyes, their mission was officially blessed by the Church. With papal approval came their code, the rule of the temple. It was a rule unlike any other. Inspired by monastic traditions, it demanded poverty, chastity, and obedience. The knights wore plain white mantles, adorned only by the red cross, granted to them later by Pope Eugenius III. The white symbolized purity, the red symbolized the blood they were willing to shed in Christ's name. To wear it was not pride, but burden. The rule was strict. Templars ate together in silence, their meals simple and humble. They owned no personal wealth. Their weapons, horses, and clothes belonged to the order. They rose at dawn for prayer, marched in procession, and lived under constant discipline. To disobey was to invite punishment not just from men, but from God. And yet, the Templars were no cloistered monks. Their hands gripped swords, their feet pressed stirrups. The same knights who knelt in chapels at dawn rode into battle at midday. This was the paradox that defined them: monks who shed blood, warriors who lived like ascetics. In this contrast, they became something entirely new, a brotherhood of militant faith. Their rituals, cloaked in secrecy, only deepened the mystery. Outsiders wondered what oaths were sworn in the dim chambers of the temple. They imagined strange rites, whispered prayers, hidden truths. Centuries later, these whispers would bloom into accusations of heresy. But in their own time, secrecy was a shield, binding them together in unity. Imagine the Templar commandery at night, a hall of stone lit by torches. Knights gathered in silence, cloaks drawn tight, heads bowed as their master reads from the rule. Outside, horses stamp in the dark, armor gleams faintly under moonlight. The air is still, charged with discipline and devotion. The rule of the temple was more than law. It was identity. It made them different from other knights, more disciplined, more feared, more admired. It stripped away individuality and bound them into one body, one brotherhood. And with that brotherhood, they would ride into history, carrying the cross upon their mantles and the weight of mystery upon their souls. The Templars were not created merely to pray. Their white mantles, marked with the blood-red cross, were symbols of action. They were called to be the sword arm of Christendom, defenders of pilgrims, guardians of the Holy Land, and warriors in a conflict where faith and steel walked hand in hand. Picture the roads of 12th century Palestine. Dust rises under the hooves of pilgrims' mules, prayers whispered as they march toward Jerusalem. In the distance, bandits lurk, ready to strike. But from behind a ridge, a band of riders appears, white cloaks fluttering, lances gleaming, shields bright with the red cross. The Templars charge, scattering foes, restoring order to chaos. For pilgrims, their sight was salvation. But the Templars were more than guardians of travelers. They became central to the crusades, fighting at the very heart of battles that defined an age. At Hattin in 1187, they stood against Saladin's armies under a burning sun, their banners defiant even as defeat loomed. At Acre, they defended the last Christian stronghold in the Holy Land, their walls soaked in blood, their cries echoing across the sea. They built castles that still stand in ruin today, great fortresses like Crac des Chevaliers, rising from the hills like stone giants. These strongholds were more than military bases. They were symbols of permanence, a claim that faith could be carved into stone and withstand the tides of time. Within their walls, chapels rang with hymns, while battlements bristled with arrows and spears. Prayer and war fused into a single life. The contrast defined them. By day, they fought with fury. By night, they prayed in silence. Their swords cut down enemies, yet their vows bound them to humility. They were monks in armor, saints with steel, warriors who claimed their violence was service to God. To friends, they were protectors. To enemies, they were angels of death cloaked in white. The battlefield gave them both glory and mystery. Chroniclers described them as fearless, fighting not for themselves, but for heaven. When they rode into combat, they rode as one body, one will, one faith. To kill a Templar was to strike down a servant of God. To fall as a Templar was to be crowned in eternal victory. And yet, their role raised questions. Could men so devoted to Christ spill so much blood? Was their sanctity real, or a mask for conquest? The paradox lingered, feeding the aura that surrounds them still. As you drift deeper into this story, imagine a desert battlefield at dusk. The sky burns red, the dust settles. Amid the fallen, a group of knights kneel in prayer, their swords laid beside them, their cloaks stained with blood. They whisper psalms as stars emerge above. Warriors of Christendom, caught between salvation and slaughter, between faith and fire. The Knights Templar began as paupers. Their very name, poor fellow soldiers of Christ, spoke of humility and sacrifice. They took vows of poverty, swore to own nothing, and lived on alms. And yet, within a century, they had become one of the richest and most powerful institutions in medieval Europe. How could men sworn to poverty hold vast estates, endless treasure, and influence that rivaled kings? This paradox is one of the deepest mysteries of the Templars. At first, their resources were meager. They begged for food, relied on donations, and depended on noble patrons who admired their mission. Slowly, gifts began to flow: land, coin, horses. Kings and lords, seeking the prayers and protection of holy warriors, endowed the Templars with estates. A knight might leave part of his inheritance to the order, believing that charity to the Templars secured salvation for his soul. Over decades, these donations multiplied. A small manor in France here, a vineyard in Spain there, a stretch of farmland in England. Piece by piece, the Templars built a network that spanned Europe. Their holdings were not just castles in the east, fertile lands, mills, vineyards, and towns across the west. But their true genius was not in gathering gifts, it was in creating a system of trust. Pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land faced danger. To carry gold or silver across mountains and seas was to invite theft or death. The Templars offered a solution. A pilgrim could deposit wealth at a Templar house in Europe, receive a written note, and then withdraw the equivalent in the Holy Land. This was more than convenience, it was safety. And it was revolutionary. In an age where theft was common and security scarce, the Templars became bankers in white mantles, guardians not only of roads, but of wealth itself. Some historians call this the birth of modern banking. Imagine the scene: a weary pilgrim, preparing for the dangerous road to Jerusalem, kneels before a Templar clerk. He places his coin upon the table, signs his mark, and receives a slip of parchment sealed with the Templar cross. Weeks later, in a Commandrian acre, he presents his note. The Templars honor it, handing him coin and securing his journey. Faith and finance entwined, trust bound by both cross and sword. The order's network grew vast. By the 13th century, Templar preceptories dotted the map of Europe, fortified estates, farms, and treasuries. They collected rents, managed crops, bred horses, and controlled trade routes. Their wealth flowed not into individual pockets, for no knight could own property, but into the coffers of the order itself. Kings noticed. Monarchs borrowed money from the Templars to fund wars, to pay debts, to secure crowns. When a king sought to raise an army, it was often the Templars who supplied the loans. When nobles required secure storage, Templar vaults became their banks. Even the papacy relied on them, entrusting the Templars with revenues from across Christendom. The paradox deepened. They were sworn to poverty, yet they counted coin by the chest. They were monks, yet their halls rang with the clink of silver. They were warriors, yet their greatest weapon became trust. With wealth came whispers. People began to ask, where did the Templars' riches go? Were they hidden in vaults beneath commanderies, buried beneath the Temple Mount in Jerusalem? Some claimed they had found relics, pieces of the true cross, even the Holy Grail itself. Others believed they discovered secrets in the ruins of Solomon's temple, knowledge too dangerous to reveal. The truth may be simpler. Their treasure was their network, their security, their ability to move money across continents. Yet myth clings to them, for secrecy breeds imagination. In villages, people whispered of hoards of gold sealed in stone chambers, guarded by knights who spoke little and revealed less. To the common people, the Templars seemed untouchable. They rode through towns, white cloaks gleaming, disciplined and silent. They did not boast of wealth, yet everyone knew their power. To kings, they were both ally and rival. To the church, they were both faithful servants and dangerous independents. Imagine the contradiction. In a chapel, a knight kneels upon cold stone, his vow of poverty binding him. Outside the chapel, peasants labor in fields owned by the order, their harvests enriching the temple's coffers. In one breath, the Templars preached humility. In the next, they counted rents and managed estates that rivaled kingdoms. Wealth is a double-edged sword. It grants power, but it also breeds envy. As the Templars grew in influence, suspicion followed. Were they truly devoted to Christ, or had they become lords hiding behind the cross? Did their vows of poverty mask hidden treasures? Kings indebted to them began to resent their power, whispering that the knights held too much, knew too much, controlled too much. And so, the very wealth that gave them strength planted the seeds of their downfall. For no king tolerates rivals, and no pope trusts a power too great to control. As you drift deeper into this story, imagine the dim vault of a Templar commandery. Torches flicker along stone walls. Chests of coin lie sealed with iron. Clerks bend over parchment, recording numbers in steady script. Beyond the walls, knights ride out to battle, their mantles white against the dust. The order is both prayer and power, both poverty and wealth. The Knights Templar became more than soldiers. They became the treasurers of Europe, the bankers of kings, the guardians of both coin and cross, and in their paradox, they drew both admiration and fear. Their wealth was not merely silver and land. It was trust. It was discipline. It was the aura of secrecy that turned their balance sheets into legend. Yet, as history shows, wealth invites envy, and envy sharpens daggers. The Templars had risen to heights unimaginable from their humble birth. But already, shadows lengthened. The same riches that made them indispensable would one day make them targets. And as kings cast their eyes upon the vaults of the temple, the story of glory would soon bend into the story of betrayal. By the 13th century, the Templars were no longer a small brotherhood of poor knights. They had become an institution that stretched from England to Jerusalem, from Portugal to Hungary. Their castles guarded frontiers, their estates produced harvests, and their vaults held the coin of kings. They answered to no monarch, for they were bound only to the Pope, and in this independence lay both their strength and their danger. Imagine their commanderies scattered across Europe. In the countryside, peasants worked fields owned by the temple. In towns, merchants paid rents to Templar houses. In courts, kings borrowed coin and sought favors. To some, the knights seemed untouchable, a power above nations, an army and a treasury combined. But power always breeds suspicion. Whispers began to spread that the Templars had grown arrogant, that their vows of humility masked ambition. Some accused them of hoarding relics or practicing secret rites. Others muttered that the order, once pure, had become too worldly, more concerned with wealth than with God. Even allies looked upon them with unease. Kings owed them debts they could not repay. Nobles envied their lands. Bishops questioned their privileges, and though the Templars remained obedient to Rome, their autonomy unsettled even the papacy. The contrast was stark. To the faithful, they were holy warriors who shed blood for Christ. To the skeptical, they were lords in white cloaks, wielding both sword and silver. Their secrecy only deepened the mystery. Meetings held behind closed doors, oaths sworn in whispers. Such things invited rumor, and rumor, in time, becomes accusation. Imagine the sight of a knight riding through Paris, his cloak bright against the crowd. Some watched with awe, others with resentment. He was sworn to poverty, yet his order owned vast wealth. He was bound to humility, yet he answered to no king. In that paradox, suspicion grew. The Templars had risen higher than any order before them, but with every step upward, they drew the gaze of envy, and in the shadows, the seeds of their downfall began to take root. The story of the Knights Templar was born in Jerusalem, and for nearly 2 centuries, the Holy Land remained the beating heart of their mission. Their castles rose like stone guardians across Palestine and Syria. Their banners flew above city walls. Their prayers echoed in chapels built upon ancient ground. To be a Templar was to stand between Christendom and its enemies, to guard the holy places where pilgrims wept and prayed. But no fortress, no vow, no army is eternal. The Holy Land, once won by crusading fervor, would in time be lost. And with its loss, the Templars' destiny began to fade. The decline began in 1187, when Saladin, Sultan of Egypt and Syria, struck with brilliance and resolve. At the Battle of Hattin, the Crusader armies were crushed under the burning Sunday. The true cross, carried as a relic of Christ's passion, was seized. The Templars fought with fury, but they were overwhelmed. Many were slain, others captured, and Jerusalem itself fell soon after. Imagine the sight. Pilgrims and priests fleeing, church bells silenced, the gates of the holy city opening to Saladin's army. For nearly a century, Jerusalem had been the jewel of Christendom's crown. Now it was gone. Though the Templars survived, their mission was shaken. They withdrew to coastal strongholds, to Acre, Tyre, and other fortresses that still stood. From these ports, they continued their defense. But the dream of holding Jerusalem had been broken. The Templars adapted, and their castles became the pillars of Christian presence in the East. Nowhere was their power more visible than in fortresses like Crac des Chevaliers in modern-day Syria. This citadel, though largely managed by the Hospitallers, symbolized the grandeur of Crusader architecture. Massive walls, towers rising against the sky, halls large enough to house thousands of men. The Templars built and held their own bastions, fortresses like Safed, Tortosa, and Chateau Pellerin. From these they launched raids, defended trade routes, and served as bulwarks against Muslim advances. Their strongholds were not just military positions, they were monasteries in stone. Within their walls, Chapels glowed with candlelight. Knights knelt in prayer, and the rhythm of devotion continued even as war thundered outside. But even stone has limits. Each fortress was an island of resistance, and one by one, the tide of history began to drown them. The final blow came in 1291 with the fall of Acre, the last great crusader stronghold in the Levant. Saladin was long gone, but new rulers, the Mamluks of Egypt, rose with equal determination. They marched north, determined to expel the Crusaders once and for all. Inside Acre, Templars, Hospitallers, and other defenders prepared for siege. The walls bristled with defenders, the sea beyond filled with desperate ships. For weeks, the Mamluks battered the city with trebuchets, their stones crashing against towers, their soldiers swarming in waves. The Templars fought fiercely, their Red Cross banners fluttering above the chaos. Imagine the scene at dawn. Smoke rising from shattered walls, knights charging through narrow streets, pilgrims huddling in terror, the clash of steel, the roar of fire, the cries of the dying filled the air. At last, the city fell. The Templars retreated to their fortress by the sea, holding out until the walls themselves collapsed around them. Few escaped. Acre was gone. With its fall, the Crusader kingdoms ended. The Holy Land, once the heart of Christendom's dream, slipped beyond reach. After Acre, the Templars withdrew to Cyprus. No longer protectors of Jerusalem, they became warriors without a cause. They still trained, still prayed, still held vast estates across Europe. But the purpose that had defined them, the defense of the Holy City, the guardianship of pilgrims, was lost. Kings and lords still valued their wealth and their discipline. But whispers began. Why did the Templars still exist? What was their mission now? Their castles in the east were rubble, their holy charge gone. They were knights without a battlefield, guardians without a shrine. The contrast was sharp. Once hailed as saviors of pilgrims, they now seemed like relics themselves. They remained powerful, wealthy, independent, but increasingly their purpose was questioned. Defeat carries weight heavier than stone. For the Templars, it meant not only the loss of land, but the loss of image. They had been warriors of Christ, chosen to defend the most sacred places on earth. Now those places were gone. Their banners trampled, their castles in ruins. Still, they tried to renew their mission. Proposals were made for new crusades, new campaigns to reclaim the Holy Land. The Templars stood ready, their ranks disciplined, their coffers full. But Europe's kings were weary. The crusading spirit had waned. Wars at home, rivalries between monarchs, and the rise of new powers in the East all made further crusades unlikely. And so, the Templars lingered, powerful yet purposeless, respected yet resented. Their decline was not immediate, but inevitable. Without Jerusalem, their light dimmed, their identity blurred. As you drift deeper into this story, imagine the ruins of Acre at twilight. The sea crashes against broken stones, gulls wheel above the waves, and silence hangs heavy where once knights fought and pilgrims prayed. The Templar banner no longer flies, its red cross lost amid smoke and ash. The Holy Land had fallen, and with it, the foundation of the Templars' mission cracked. They remained, still wealthy, still disciplined, but shadows of their former selves. In that shadow, suspicion grew, envy sharpened, and kings began to wonder what could be done with an order that no longer served its sacred purpose. The stage was set for betrayal. The story of glory had become a story of decline, and soon, the knights who once defended Christendom would themselves stand accused of heresy, of treachery, of sins both whispered and shouted. The Holy Land was gone, and with it the Templars' sanctuary. What remained was wealth, secrecy, and the growing shadow of doom. The fall of the Holy Land left the Templars vulnerable, but their true undoing came not from foreign battlefields, but from the courts of Europe. Their wealth, their independence, and their secrecy had long stirred envy. And in France, one man's ambition turned suspicion into destruction. King Philip IV. Philip, called Philip the Fair, was outwardly pious, yet inwardly ruthless. His treasury was empty from wars and debts, much of it owed to the Templars themselves. To him, the Order's wealth was a temptation too great, its independence an affront to royal power. And so, with careful planning, he moved against them. On October 13th, 1307, a Friday, that legend still darkens, the king struck. Across France, at dawn, royal agents stormed Templar commanderies. Knights were dragged from their beds, their cloaks torn, their swords seized. Hundreds were arrested in a single day. The charges: heresy, idolatry, blasphemy, corruption. Imagine the shock. The Templars, once hailed as holy warriors, now branded as servants of the devil. Townsfolk whispered in fear as knights, bound in chains, were paraded through streets. The church itself seemed shaken. Could it be true? Had the Order fallen into sin? Under torture, many knights confessed. Some admitted to spitting on the cross, others to denying Christ, others to secret rituals in shadowed halls. Yet such confessions were pulled from lips broken by pain, from bodies stretched on racks, from minds shattered by fear. The truth is clouded. Were their secret rites misunderstood by outsiders, or were the charges fabrications, crafted to justify Philip's greed? The rule of the temple demanded obedience and secrecy, qualities that could easily be twisted into suspicion. Rituals meant as symbols may have seemed strange to accusers, eager to believe the worst. The Pope, Clement V, found himself caught in the storm. He owed his papacy in part to Philip, yet the Templars were under papal authority. To defend them was to defy a king. To condemn them was to destroy an order of Christendom. At first, Clement protested, but the tide of accusation was too strong. Councils were held, trials convened. Across Europe, the charges spread. In England, Spain, and beyond, kings reluctantly followed Philip's example. Yet, outside France, few confessions could be drawn. In some lands, the Templars were quietly absolved, but the stain of heresy, once painted, could not easily be erased. For 7 years, trials and interrogations dragged on. Some knights recanted, declaring their earlier confessions false, wrung from them by torment. Others held fast, proclaiming innocence to the end. Still, the Order's reputation withered. Imagine a Templar, once proud in white mantle, now standing before judges, stripped of armor, his body bearing the marks of torture. His voice quivers as he denies charges, but his fate is sealed. The court does not seek truth, it seeks conclusion. In 1312, under immense pressure, Pope Clement dissolved the Order. Officially, the Templars ceased to exist. Their lands were transferred, at least in theory, to the Hospitallers. In reality, much of their wealth was seized by kings and nobles. The brotherhood that had once stretched across continents was no more. Yet the story did not end quietly. In 1314, Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master, was brought to trial. Alongside him stood Geoffrey de Charny, another senior Templar. Both had confessed under torture. But as the sentence of life imprisonment was read, they stunned the court. Before the crowd, they recanted. They declared the Order innocent. Their earlier confessions lies forced by pain. Gasps filled the air. The judges, shocked, changed their verdict. They condemned the men not to imprisonment, but to death. That evening, on an island in the Seine, de Molay and de Charny were tied to stakes. The flames rose, crackling against the night. Witnesses said de Molay's voice carried over the fire, proclaiming the innocence of the Templars and calling upon God to judge their persecutors. According to legend, he cursed both the king and the pope, summoning them to appear before God within a year. Within months, both Philip IV and Clement V were dead. As you drift deeper into this story, imagine the silence of a Parisian night broken by the roar of fire. The Red Cross, once a symbol of protection, glows upon the mantle of a man consumed by flame. His face is calm, his voice steady, as he declares faith to the very end. Around him, the crowd watches in awe and fear. The Templars had been destroyed, but in their destruction, they became legend. The trials of the Temple were more than the end of an order. They were the clash of power and faith, suspicion and secrecy, greed and devotion. The knights who once defended Jerusalem were condemned not by swords, but by whispers, envy, and the hunger of kings. And yet, in their ashes, a myth was born, a myth that would outlive courts, crowns, and kingdoms. The story of the Templars was forged in vows of purity, hardened in battle, and enriched by wealth. Yet its ending came not with the clash of armies or the fall of castles, but with the crackle of flames on a Parisian island. It was the spring of 1314. Years of arrests, confessions, and trials had left the once mighty order broken, their fortresses gone, their lands seized, their name blackened. Yet one figure remained to carry the weight of centuries. Jacques de Molay, the 23rd and last Grand Master of the Knights Templar. De Molay was an old man, perhaps in his 70s, hardened by decades of service. He had seen the Templars rise and fall, had commanded armies and negotiated with kings. Now he stood in chains, accused of crimes he denied. Torture had wrung confessions from him, but his faith endured. On March 18th, he was led with 3 companions to the steps of Notre Dame. Before clergy and crowds, their sentence was pronounced: life imprisonment for heresy. But de Molay, weary yet unbroken, stunned the assembly. He rose and declared the order innocent, his confession a lie forced from him by torment. Geoffrey de Charny, master of Normandy, echoed his words. Their voices rang across the square, defiant, unwavering. The judges froze. This was rebellion, their verdict overturned by the very men they sought to silence. Philip IV, furious and unwilling to tolerate defiance, demanded a swift, brutal punishment. That evening, without trial or delay, the 2 men were condemned to burn. They were taken to a small island in the Seine, between the royal palace and the Ile de la Cité. As the sun set, the pyres were prepared, wood piled high, torches ready. Crowds gathered along the riverbanks, their faces lit by firelight, their murmurs echoing in the night. Jacques de Molay, bound to the stake, raised his voice one final time. Chroniclers wrote that he proclaimed the innocence of the Templars, called upon heaven to judge their persecutors, and surrendered his soul to God. Flames rose, licking at his cloak, consuming the white mantle marked with the red cross. Imagine the scene: the roar of fire, the crack of burning wood, the night air filled with smoke and heat. The old knight stands firm, eyes fixed beyond the crowd, beyond the king, beyond the pope. His voice carries through the flames, a prayer, a curse. Legend grew from that night. It is said de Molay cursed Philip IV and Pope Clement V, summoning them to face God within a year. Whether spoken or imagined, the tale spread quickly. Within months, both men were dead, the Pope of illness, the king from a sudden accident. To many, this was divine justice, the final victory of the Templars, even in death. The story fed into myth, that the order had not perished but lived on in secret, that its last master had bound its enemies with words as powerful as swords. The curse became a seed, from which countless legends would grow. With de Molay's death, the Templars' story seemed to close. Their order was dissolved, their name condemned, their members scattered. Some joined other orders, like the Hospitallers. Others faded into obscurity. A few may have fled to distant lands, fueling rumors of hidden survival. But their ending was unlike any other. Most orders die quietly, forgotten by history. The Templars died in fire, their last master defiant, their last moment a spectacle that burned itself into memory. The image of knights consumed by flames, yet proclaiming innocence, became impossible to forget. As you drift deeper into this story, imagine the island in the Seine, long after the fire. The crowd has gone, the smoke has cleared, only ashes remain. The river flows past, indifferent, carrying fragments of charred wood downstream. Yet in those ashes lies a whisper that still lingers. The Templars had been destroyed, but they had also been transformed. No longer merely knights, they became legends. Their fall was not silence, it was shadow. Shadows that stretched across centuries, carrying tales of curses, secrets, and treasures. The order had ended in fire. But fire does not only destroy, fire also leaves embers, and those embers would smolder, glowing faintly through time, waiting to ignite imaginations for generations to come. The fire on the Seine should have been the end. The white mantles had turned to ash, the Grand Master's voice silenced by smoke, the order dissolved by papal decree. The Knights Templar had ceased to exist, or so it seemed. Yet history rarely obeys decrees. Some stories refuse to die. The Templars, though broken in body, lived on in imagination. Their name became a shadow that haunted kings and popes, a whisper in the corridors of power, a legend that refused to fade. Not all Templars perished in France. Across Europe, many were spared execution. In Portugal, King Denis quietly protected them, reconstituting them as the Order of Christ. In Spain, some blended into other knightly orders, their lands absorbed, but their traditions remembered. In England and Germany, trials produced little evidence, and most knights were simply pensioned into retirement. Imagine an old knight, stripped of his cloak, living quietly in a village. Children whisper that he was once a Templar, a guardian of treasure and secrets. He smiles, says little, and tends his fields. The order had ended, yet its members carried fragments of its memory into obscurity. But silence breeds imagination. The Templars' secrecy, their wealth, and their sudden fall created fertile ground for myth. Rumors spread that their treasure had never been seized. Some claimed it was smuggled from Paris on the night before the arrests, carried away in wagons to hidden vaults. Others believed it was buried beneath castles, or spirited overseas to Scotland or beyond. And then came the greatest legend of all, the Holy Grail. By the late Middle Ages, poets and chroniclers began to link the Templars to this most mysterious relic, the cup said to have held Christ's blood. Did the Templars guard it in Jerusalem? Did they uncover it beneath the Temple Mount? Or was the Grail not a cup at all, but a secret knowledge passed from night to night? The truth may never be known. Yet, the myth endured, turning the Templars into keepers not only of swords, but of mysteries too great for the world to see. The tale of Jacques de Molay's curse deepened their legend. As the story spread, people believed the deaths of Philip IV and Clement V were not coincidence, but divine vengeance. Some whispered that the line of French kings was doomed by the Grand Master's words, a prophecy that seemed fulfilled when the Capetian dynasty collapsed soon after. The Templars had been destroyed in fire, but in fire they gained a mythic power. To many, they became martyrs, unjustly condemned, their souls lingering as avengers. To others, they became cautionary ghosts, a reminder of what happens when wealth and secrecy grow too great. Centuries passed, but the Templars refused to vanish. In the Renaissance, scholars rediscovered their story and wove it into new myths. In the 18th century, Freemasonry, a brotherhood of secrecy and ritual, claimed the Templars as spiritual ancestors. Masonic rites spoke of hidden knowledge preserved by knights who survived the flames. Whether true or invention, the link bound the Templars to a chain of secret societies stretching into the modern world. Imagine a candlelit lodge, centuries after de Molay's death. Men in robes whisper oaths, invoking the memory of the Templars. Their rituals, though new, echo the aura of the order destroyed long ago. The Templars, once warriors, had become symbols of mystery. Guardians, not of castles, but of ideas. From that time forward, their legend grew only larger. In novels, in poetry, in films and stories, the Templars appear again and again. Sometimes they are protectors, noble knights guarding sacred truths. Sometimes they are villains, conspirators cloaked in secrecy. They are treasure hunters, keepers of relics, seekers of hidden wisdom. Their reality was complex, yet myth simplified them into symbols. Symbols that could be reshaped endlessly. Think of how many tales, from the Grail romances to modern thrillers, hinge on the Templars' shadow. Their name carries weight, a whisper that stirs curiosity. Even today, books and films speak of their secrets, their treasure, their survival. The order may have burned in 1314, but in imagination, it never stopped riding. And here lies the deepest mystery. Who were the Templars, truly? Were they pious knights who gave their lives for Christ? Were they worldly bankers who grew too rich? Were they heretics as accused, or martyrs as remembered? History tells us they were warriors and administrators, disciplined and devout, flawed and human. Legend tells us they were guardians of secrets, cursed martyrs, keepers of the Grail. Both truths exist, one in the pages of chronicles, the other in the dreams of storytellers. The contrast defines them. In history, they ended in fire. In legend, they endure forever. As you drift into sleep, imagine the sound of hooves upon stone. Cloaked figures ride through twilight, their mantles white, their crosses red. They are gone, yet not gone. Their swords are silent, yet their legend speaks. In ruined castles, in whispered tales, in the glow of stories told by firelight, the Templars remain. The Order of the Temple began with 9 knights in poverty. It ended with a Grand Master in flames. But between those moments lies a story of faith and greed, of devotion and suspicion, of glory and ruin. And though centuries have passed, the name still lingers, part history, part myth, part dream. The Knights Templar were never only men. They became an idea, and ideas do not burn.